She once stood under the same spotlight that turned rappers into legends. But somewhere along the way, her name disappeared like smoke after fire. Her voice once echoed from Detroit to Los Angeles, smooth yet dangerous, velvet wrapped around a blade. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing truth. And in a world built on illusion, truth can be fatal. They called her boss the first female gangster rapper ever signed to Def Jam, a woman who spoke with courage louder than any beat until silence swallowed her whole. So what really happened to the woman who dared to rap about reality when everyone else was selling dreams? Let's get into her story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Detroit, 1969. The air smelled of oil and rhythm, a city pulsing with factories, Motown hits, and the heartbeat of working-class dreams. On the east side, where music poured from every porch and struggle was stitched into every block, a baby girl named Lachelle Laws came into the world. Her parents called her Lel, not knowing that name would one day echo in hip-hop history. She grew up in a modest, middle-class home where education mattered and soul music was a kind of prayer. Her mother, a devoted schoolteacher, believed in discipline and dignity. Her father was the soundtrack of the house spinning Miles Davis, Aretha Franklin, and Marvin Gaye on old vinyl until the walls seemed to hum. From those melodies, Lel learned something she'd never forget, that truth can live inside a song. While other kids played outside, she stayed in her room, scribbling in notebooks. Her words were sharp but sincere, carrying the rhythm of her city, the rhythm of machines, buses, and distant arguments drifting through open windows. She didn't live the street life, but she saw it through her classmates, through stories whispered by neighbors, through the pain that hung in the air like humidity. And in those moments, she started to understand people in a way few ever could. Teachers called her too quiet. Classmates said she was too smart to rap, but those judgments only fueled her. Behind that silence was steel, Detroit steel, and it was being forged into something powerful. By the late '70s, music around her began to change. The smooth soul of Motown was fading, replaced by a raw new sound rising from New York hip-hop. To most of Detroit, it was still foreign. To Lel, it was revelation. She'd sit by the radio late at night, tuning into East Coast stations just to catch those rhymes over the static. The words weren't polished, but they were real, and that rawness spoke to her more than any pop melody ever could. She began writing differently, not just poems, but verses, rhymes that carried truth, anger, humor, and hope all at once. She wrote about what she saw: closed factories, parents working double shifts, young men losing their way. For her, rap wasn't rebellion, it was reflection. In high school, she started performing at small community gatherings, nothing glamorous, just open mics and talent nights in church basements or youth centers. But when she grabbed that microphone, something changed. The quiet girl vanished. Her voice had weight, smooth but commanding, like someone who'd been waiting her whole life to be heard. People took notice. They didn't always understand her message, but they felt it. She wasn't mimicking what she heard on the radio. She was telling her own truth, Detroit truth, born from observation, not imitation. By the time she turned 18, the city was different. Factories were closing. Jobs were disappearing. Yet the creative fire in Detroit never died. The same city that gave birth to Motown was now breeding something tougher: underground hip-hop, graffiti art, and spoken word poetry. And Lel was right in the middle of it. But Detroit, for all its soul, wasn't easy. Opportunities were rare. Radio stations didn't play local rap. To chase her dream, she'd have to leave the only city she'd ever known. Friends told her it was impossible, that no woman from Detroit could make it in a male-dominated industry. But she'd already decided. She wasn't leaving to escape. She was leaving to evolve. As the '80s came to a close, she packed her notebooks and a handful of demo tapes. Her destination was Houston, a city with a growing underground scene, a new rhythm waiting to be heard. The bus ride was long, and the world outside the window looked endless. But somewhere between the highways and the static of late-night radio, she smiled. Because for the first time, the dream didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. Before the red carpets and flashing lights, there was just a young woman with a pen, a voice, and a city that taught her how to be real. And that was enough to start a revolution. Houston wasn't Detroit. The air was heavier, the heat lingered longer, and the slang rolled off tongues like a foreign language. When Lachelle Laws stepped off that bus with a bag full of notebooks and one dream in her pocket, she knew she was far from home. But she wasn't afraid. She'd come from a city that built cars out of steel and people out of resilience. The Houston scene was still forming, then not yet the empire it would become. Local DJs were experimenting with slower tempos and thick bass lines that rumbled through the night. It was hip-hop with a southern drawl, raw and unpolished. For a newcomer from Detroit, it was a whole new rhythm, but rhythm was something she understood. She started performing at small clubs and open mics, stepping into smoky rooms filled with young rappers battling for recognition. When she grabbed the mic, people turned their heads. Her voice didn't beg for attention, it commanded it. Smooth, deep, and deliberate, like velvet wrapped around a blade. Most Houston rappers talked about street hustles and southern pride. Lel, who had started calling herself Boss, took a different path. Her rhymes didn't glorify struggle. They analyzed it. She wrote about poverty, inequality, and the way America looked at young black lives. The crowd might have come for the beats, but they stayed for the words. It was during one of those nights that she met DJ D, another Detroit native chasing music under the southern Sunday. He had the turntables, she had the fire. Together, they formed a duo called D and Boss. Their chemistry was instant. His beats were thunder, her verses were lightning. They started recording tracks in a small home studio, just a microphone, a beat machine, and faith. The sound was different, intellectual, streetwise, unfiltered. They rapped not for fame, but for truth. The underground noticed first. Local DJs began spinning their songs on late-night radio. Slowly, Houston started to whisper her name. But being a female MC in that era meant fighting twice as hard for half the respect. Some promoters refused to book them. Others said her lyrics were too serious or too masculine. Still, she never toned it down. Every verse was her way of saying, I see the world, and I'm not afraid to tell it. By 1990, word had spread beyond Houston. Underground magazines mentioned her name next to rising West Coast artists. Her delivery, sharp yet poetic, made her stand out in a crowd of imitators. She was real, and real was rare. But Boss wanted more than regional respect. She wanted her music to travel as far as her message. When she listened to national rap stations, she could hear where hip-hop was heading toward something bigger, more cinematic. She knew she had to be part of it. So in 1991, with a handful of songs and the same determination that had carried her from Detroit's backstreets to Houston's underground clubs, she packed her tapes once again and headed west to Los Angeles. The city of dreams, the city that could make you a legend or make you disappear, and waiting inside her bag was a demo called Deeper, the song that would change everything. Los Angeles in 1991 was a city on edge, glowing with ambition but trembling beneath tension. The riots, the headlines, the fame, the fear, it was all part of the same rhythm. For Boss, it was the rhythm of opportunity. She arrived with no big record deal, no entourage, no safety net, just her voice, her faith, and a cassette tape that carried her story. That tape was Deeper, a song born out of late nights, empty notebooks, and truths she could no longer hold inside. It wasn't a fantasy. It was testimony, her life, her reflections, her message to anyone who had ever been misunderstood. The beat was haunting, built around a Gwen McCrae sample that pulsed like a heartbeat. The bass line throbbed with pain and beauty, while her voice slid through it like smoke through glass. When Deeper played, people stopped what they were doing. It wasn't just sound, it was confession. One night, through a chain of DJs and mixtapes, that demo landed in the hands of someone inside Def Jam, the powerhouse label that shaped hip-hop's golden age. The team that had built careers for LL Cool J, Public Enemy, and EPMD suddenly found themselves listening to something they'd never heard before. A woman spitting bars with the ferocity of a street soldier and the insight of a poet. They called her in. No fancy setup, no PR team, no glam. Just a meeting room, a boombox, and her. The moment she started talking, the room changed. She didn't beg for a deal, she belonged there. Her confidence wasn't arrogance. It was Detroit grit wrapped in honesty. Russell Simmons' people were stunned. She didn't fit the mold of female rappers they'd known. No shiny image, no soft angles. She had presence, depth, something that made you listen even in silence. Def Jam offered her a deal, and with that signature, history shifted. Boss became the first female gangster rapper ever signed to Def Jam, a label that had never seen someone like her before. The announcement traveled fast through the hip-hop underground. To some, it felt like a victory for every woman who had ever been told her voice was too loud, her story too raw. To others, it was a gamble. Could the world handle a female MC who didn't play by its rules? Boss didn't care. She wasn't here to please anyone. She was here to tell the truth. In interviews from that time, she spoke with calm conviction. "I'm not trying to act tough. I'm just telling stories the way I see them." That was her difference. She didn't perform gangster, she interpreted it. By the end of 1992, she had begun recording her debut album, Born Gangstas. The sessions were electric long nights, smoke-filled studios, legendary producers like DJ Premier and Def Jeff shaping the sound. Everyone involved felt it. Something historic was happening. As she left the studio one early morning, Los Angeles was still dark, streetlights glowing on the pavement. She looked at the city skyline, knowing her voice was finally about to be heard not just as a rapper, but as a force. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to smile. The world hadn't recognized her yet, but it would. 1993. Hip-hop was changing shape in real time. Amid the noise and neon, a woman from Detroit stepped forward and claimed her space. She released Born Gangstas under Def Jam. The sound hit like weather-heavy, charged, impossible to ignore. DJ Premier, Def Jeff, and Tha Alcoholics helped carve the edges, but the core was hers: hard truth, quiet rage, and a poet's eye for the world as it really is. Deeper led the way. The bass arrived first, then the Gwen McCrae sample wrapped the room in a strange, beautiful ache. When her voice cut through, the track stopped being a song and became a testimony. She wasn't chasing shock. She was building a case about fear, survival, and the soft places people hide to stay strong. Radio moved, MTV added it, BET rotated it. The box kept calling it back. In cars, in barbershops, in dim apartments where the blinds never opened all the way, Deeper turned strangers into witnesses. Heads nodded before words formed. The city lights outside seemed to pulse on beat. Fans felt seen. The streets gave respect quickly and without negotiation. Critics, so often unkind to women in rap, chose different language this time. Commanding, measured, dangerous, because it listens before it strikes. Album cuts carried the same gravity. Progress of elimination walked listeners through choices no one wants to make. Recipe of a Hoe aimed at hypocrisy, not spectacle, turning a mirror toward the culture that profits from pain, then punishes the ones who describe it. She did not posture, she observed. That difference mattered. People reached for comparisons. Some called her a female Eazy-E. The label never fit. She wasn't borrowing anyone's angle. Her power came from distance and detail, the perspective of a woman who knew the room, read the temperature, and chose each word like a measured step on broken glass. The image became iconic fast. Black shades, Carhartt jacket, chin raised just enough to suggest she'd already heard the doubt and decided it had nothing to teach her. No glitter, no softened edges. Presence without performance. Shows confirmed what the records promised. Under stage lights, she let the music breathe. No wasted motion. The crowd leaned in because she gave them reasons to. You could feel the air thin when Deeper opened a set first, the bass, then the hush, then the verse that made the room hold still. Def Jam understood what they had, a center of gravity, rare and unmoving. For a moment, conversation shifted. A female MC wasn't being framed as an outlier or a novelty. She was being measured against the bestand the measure held. But even in triumph, there was a hairline crack no spotlight could seal. Hip-hop in that moment demanded a single definition of real. It wanted documents, not nuance. It preferred one story told one way. She was telling many stories at once about where danger comes from, who absorbs it, and how truth can live in a witness as surely as it lives in a participant. For now, the music drowned out the questions. The applause felt clean. The nights ran long and electric studios at dawn, interviews at noon, sound checks at dusk, a city that never fully slept. She stood inside it all like a fixed star, not loud, not pleading, certain. And as Born Gangstas found its listener-sewn radio spin, one taped video, one bootleg dub at a time, she looked out over the crowd and did what she had always done. Speak plainly, carry weight, leave silence where the truth could echo. The peak had a sound. It had a face. For a brief, shining stretch of 1,993, it had her name. Success had made her visible, but visibility came with its own kind of danger. The same press that had celebrated Boss as a fearless voice now wanted proof. They wanted to know whether the stories she told were hers, or borrowed from the streets she described so vividly. At first, it was small whispers. A few journalists asking too many questions. DJs joking on air about her polished accent. Then came the headlines. They printed her real name, Lachelle Laws. They published her background. Middle class, college educated, a teacher's daughter from Detroit. It should have been harmless information. But in the 1990 hip-hop world, where authenticity was sacred, it was an open wound. To be real meant you had lived every lyric you spoke. And if you hadn't, the culture could turn on you overnight. For Boss, it wasn't a scandal of crime, it was a scandal of perception. She never claimed to be a hustler or a killer. Her music didn't glorify the streets, it interpreted them. But the industry wasn't built for nuance. The public wanted boxes, real or fake, street or soft, pure or performed. She lived somewhere in between, and that made her dangerous. Def Jam tried to stand by her at first. Her artistry had never been in question, but momentum in music moves fast, faster than loyalty. DJs stopped playing her singles. Radio cooled off. The same magazines that once called her revolutionary now used words like pretender and manufactured. The hardest part wasn't losing airplay. It was watching silence spread colleagues, avoiding eye contact, calls that stopped coming, features that fell through. The quiet, once her ally, now felt cruel. Still, she didn't lash out. That wasn't her way. In interviews, she spoke with restraint. I just told my truth. If they don't understand it, that's on them. But restraint was mistaken for guilt, and the more she refused to defend herself, the more the world filled the silence with assumptions. By mid-1994, the spotlight had dimmed. Born Gangstas was still respected, but the machine had moved on. New acts filled the airwaves. The woman who'd broken barriers was suddenly invisible. Friends said she retreated into writing again, notebooks piled on tables, half-finished verses about truth and betrayal. Her pen still worked like it always had. Sharp, observant, unwilling to lie just to belong. Sometimes she'd drive alone through Los Angeles at night, listening to Deeper on old cassette. The song that once opened every door now felt like a ghost following her through the city. Behind the music, there was exhaustion, not from failure, but from the weight of always having to prove what was already real. The irony was brutal. The same honesty that built her career had destroyed it. The industry didn't punish lies, it punished truth that didn't fit the script. By the end of the year, her contract with Def Jam was quietly allowed to expire. The second album, the one that might have rewritten the story, never saw release. For most artists, that would have been the end. But for Boss, it was only the beginning of a harder, quieter fight, one not for fame, but for identity. When the lights went out, she didn't chase them, she just stood in the dark, waiting for her own rhythm to return. When the applause faded, the silence felt heavier than the fame ever did. By 1995, Boss was living in Los Angeles, the same city that had once promised her everything, now barely remembered her name. The phone stopped ringing, the magazines moved on. The new generation was already rewriting the rules of rap, and the woman who once defined raw honesty was now a ghost in her own story. She tried to stay in the game, features here, background writing there, anything to keep her voice alive. Some producers called her back for hooks, others for lyrics they didn't have time to finish. But each session felt smaller, quieter. The rooms that once buzzed with energy now felt like echoes. She could feel the machine slowing down around her. The same industry that had demanded authenticity now had no use for it. Trends were changing flashier, louder, faster. What she offered was reflection, not spectacle. That didn't sell anymore. Money ran thin. Friends drifted away. In interviews years later, she admitted she'd felt trapped not by failure, but by perception. I told the truth, and they turned it into something ugly, she said. After that, it was hard to trust anyone with my story. There were nights when she'd sit with old notebooks scattered across the table, pages full of unfinished verses. The words still came easily. What was missing was the world's willingness to listen. But she wrote anyway, not for charts, not for labels, just to keep the rhythm of herself alive. Health problems started creeping in around that time. Headaches at first. Fatigue. Nothing serious, she thought. But her body was sending warnings she ignored, too busy fighting for artistic survival. When doctors finally told her about her kidney condition, she brushed it off, another obstacle in a life full of them. The emotional toll was harder to hide. She'd go out sometimes, attending small shows, watching younger artists who didn't even know they were walking through doors she'd opened. Some recognized her, most didn't, and she never corrected them. Yet even in those quiet moments, there was no bitterness, just a calm understanding. She'd seen how fame worked, how it could crown and crucify within the same year. Her story was living proof that being real in hip-hop didn't guarantee anything but struggle. Still, she refused to disappear completely. Detroit was still in her veins, and Detroit didn't raise quitters. She began mentoring a few local acts, offering advice about writing and survival. "Don't let the game change you," she told them. "Make the game respect you." It wasn't a comeback, not yet, but it was resilience, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't announce itself, but simply keeps breathing. By the end of the decade, the spotlight had moved far away. But in some small corners of the underground, her voice still echoed, passed along in old mixtapes, whispered in conversations between artists who knew what it meant to tell the truth and pay the price. For the world, her story was fading. For her, it was just changing chapters. By the early 2000s, the music had grown quiet around her. But in the stillness, a different kind of noise began, the sound of hospitals, machines, and doctors speaking in the slow language of concern. Boss had been feeling weak for months. What she thought was exhaustion turned out to be kidney disease. The same woman who once commanded stages with a voice like thunder was now tethered to dialysis machines, her body fighting battles her spirit didn't sign up for. She joked through the pain. "Guess I'm still a boss," she told friends. "Just fighting a different kind of war." Even in the hospital, she carried humor like armor, a Detroit survival instinct that no illness could strip away. Her world had shrunk to small rooms and short visits, but the heart of who she was remained the same. She still wrote verses on napkins, lyrics in notebooks, thoughts scribbled in margins between doctor notes. The ink became her medicine. There was a GoFundMe launched by friends when her condition worsened. The public, quiet for so long, suddenly remembered her. Fans from every corner of the country donated what they could, some money, some words. Messages flooded the page. "We remember you, boss. You were the truth." Those messages mattered. They were proof that even when fame forgets, art remembers. Still, the pain didn't ease. The disease advanced. There were strokes, seizures, and long nights where survival felt uncertain. Yet even then, she found ways to stay close to the culture she loved. When she could, she'd show up at small community shows not to perform, but to mentor. Young women trying to break into rap would find her sitting quietly backstage, offering advice no textbook could teach. "Don't copy," she told them. "Don't apologize. Just tell it how it really is." Those words came from experience, the kind bought with blood and silence. The industry that once rejected her was now full of artists who had learned from her, even if they didn't know her name. Every time she saw a woman stand tall on a stage and spit bars without compromise, she smiled. She didn't need credit. She only needed proof that truth had survived. By 2010, her health was fragile, but her voice still carried power. In one rare interview that year, she said something that defined her legacy. "People think being a boss means money or fame. For me, it's surviving your own story." There was no bitterness in her tone, only peace. She'd learned that legacy wasn't about who gets remembered first, but who gets remembered right. The world didn't see the quiet victories, the laughter in the hospital, the advice shared in dim studios, the lines written through pain. But those moments were hers. Fame had vanished long ago, but purpose never did. For Boss, that was enough. Time had changed hip-hop, but the echoes of Boss never disappeared. By the 2010 seconds, a new generation of artists was rising, women who no longer felt they had to soften their voices to be heard. They rapped about truth, power, survival, and pain. What many didn't realize was that the blueprint had already been drawn decades earlier. by a woman who refused to lie to make her art fit. Boss wasn't charting hits anymore, but her fingerprints were everywhere. In the grit of Remy Ma, in the defiance of Cardi B, in the fearlessness of Megan Thee Stallion, her energy lingered. She had made space in a genre that once told women to shrink. Every verse she wrote had carved a little more room for honesty to exist. Detroit never forgot her. Local radio stations still played deeper during anniversary specials. DJs spoke her name with reverence, and murals appeared on walls across the east side, her face behind black shades, the word respect painted boldly underneath. For a city built on work and resilience, she represented both. Hip-hop historians began re-evaluating her story, finally seeing what had been overlooked the first time. Articles described Born Gangstas as ahead of its time. Critics praised its balance between social awareness and street realism. What had once been dismissed as too hard for radio was now studied as a milestone, one of the earliest female narratives to challenge what gangster could mean. The internet became her second stage. Fans uploaded old interviews, rare performances, and remastered videos. Comment sections filled with people rediscovering her voice. I still have this on cassette. She walked so the rest could run. Real before real was trending. The beauty of rediscovery was that it came from the people, not the industry. No label campaigns, no PR spin, just love that had waited too long to be spoken. For Boss, those final years were a mix of frailty and grace. Her health kept her close to home, but her mind never left the music. She kept mentoring, kept writing, and when her strength allowed, she'd make surprise appearances at small hip-hop events in Detroit. One night, around 2010, she walked into a packed community hall, wearing her old Def Jam jacket and those same dark shades. The crowd froze, then erupted. When she took the mic and rapped the opening lines of Deeper, the room felt it 2 decades gone, and her voice still hit like thunder. People cried. Some shouted her name. That moment wasn't about fame. It was about faith proof that time can't erase truth when it's spoken from the soul. She'd spent her life being misunderstood, mislabeled, and overlooked. But now, in the faces of a new generation, she could finally see what she'd built. Not charts, not trophies, legacy. She once said, "I used to chase success. Now I just chase purpose." And somehow, purpose found her back. When Boss passed in 2024, the world finally paused to listen. The same silence that had surrounded her in life now became a moment of collective reflection. Across social media, radio, and television, her name reappeared not as a headline for scandal, but as a headline for honor. Detroit took it personally. Local stations played Deeper on loop for days. DJs shared memories of her strength, and fans filled the streets with candles and murals. The same city that raised her now mourned her as one of its truest daughters. On brick walls across the east side, her lyrics appeared in spray paint. Truth don't die. Ugh. From Los Angeles to New York, tributes poured in. Artists who had built their own fame on authenticity acknowledged her influence. Tierra Whack, Rhapsody, and even mainstream stars like Latto and Megan Thee Stallion spoke her name with gratitude. She made it possible for us to be real without apology, one post read. Hip-hop journalists, who once questioned her story, rewrote it. Articles called her a pioneer misread by her time. Podcasts dissected Born Gangstas track by track, calling it a document of its era prophetic, unpolished, necessary. For a culture obsessed with proving who's real, her story had become the ultimate lesson. Realness isn't performance, it's perspective. YouTube filled with tributes and documentaries within days. Fans uploaded remixes, retrospectives, and personal essays. A new generation kids who hadn't been born when her album first dropped discovered her voice and fell in love with it. She sounds like the truth, one comment read. Her streaming numbers rose overnight. Vinyl repressings of Born Gangstas sold out. But more meaningful than the numbers were the words, fans finally saying what they hadn't said in time. You never got your flowers, boss, so we're giving them now. Detroit declared a local Remembrance Day in her honor. Underground rappers held tribute shows, performing her verses in dim clubs that once played her records on repeat. Some cried through their sets. Others smiled, knowing she would have told them to keep rapping, to keep telling the truth. For decades, She'd been the cautionary tale, the one who didn't play the game right. Now, she had become the symbol of what the game was missing. Her story reminded the world that authenticity doesn't need approval to matter. That silence doesn't mean defeat. That sometimes history takes its time finding justice. In one tribute post that went viral, a fan wrote, "She didn't be underrated. She lived underrated, and that's even braver." Those words captured it perfectly. Boss had spent her life teaching by example. That truth outlasts fashion, that dignity is louder than fame. Even in death, her voice didn't fade. It multiplied across timelines, playlists, murals, and memories. And for those who truly listened, she never disappeared at all. The lights have faded, but the echo remains. You can still feel it, that deep vibration from deeper, that voice that cut through noise and found its way into the truth. Boss didn't chase fame, and maybe that's why her legacy feels so pure now. What she left behind wasn't just music. It was a reminder that honesty has a sound, and it doesn't fade. Detroit raised her, Houston shaped her, Def Jam gave her a stage, but her voice that came from something higher. It carried the rhythm of survival, of faith, of being misunderstood yet unbroken. When she stepped to the mic, she wasn't acting tough. She was telling stories no one else wanted to tell. She showed that a woman could be powerful without pretending, fearless without losing compassion. And for that, she paid the highest price: silence. But here's the truth. Silence doesn't mean forgotten. Every time Deeper plays on a late-night playlist, every time a young artist writes a verse about truth over image, she's there. Not in the spotlight, but in the sound. Her story asks something of us, something simple but rare. To listen. To remember. To give people their flowers while they can still smell them. Boss's journey was never about perfection. It was about purpose. She lived through eras that tried to define her and chose to define herself instead. In doing so, she carved a space for everyone who's ever felt unseen, everyone who's ever been told they weren't real enough to belong. And maybe that's what legacy really is. Not applause, not trophies, but proof that your truth still moves people long after you're gone. So tonight, maybe play Deeper one more time. Let those lyrics sit in the quiet. Think of the woman who stood in front of a world that didn't know how to understand her and spoke anyway. Because fame fades. Trends fade. But truth, that's forever. If you believe stories like hers deserve to be told, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Stars Underrated. Here, we honor the voices. The world forgot the legends who spoke their truth and never looked back. Because the world forgot, but we remember.